Okay, we'll start then. Welcome to History Night in Springettsbury. These are the dates this year: April 10th, July 9th, and October 2nd. We'll have a new set of dates probably coming up in October. I'll put up the new dates. We originally are like every Wednesday, second Wednesday, but we've had conflicts, and I expect conflicts to occur next year too, so we'll put up a new schedule then. A little housekeeping. First of all, thanks to the Springettsbury Township supervisors for their support of History Nights. Please silence your phones. The restrooms are located through that door, back the hallway to your left. Other than when I ask a question of this gathering, I'd appreciate if you would hold your questions and discussion until the end of the talk. As with all History Nights, this event is being recorded with the content viewable as a YouTube video on the Township website a week or two after the talk. History Nights are a venue of the Springettsbury Township Historic Preservation Committee. Our committee was established 32 years ago by the Board of Supervisors at the time of Springettsbury's centennial to identify historically significant structures and sites while generating interest in and documenting the township's history. Our committee consists of up to 9 members appointed by the boards of supervisors. We currently have a full contingent of members right now. Our committee started printing booklets on facets of Springettsbury Township history. They are available at History Night events. Rob Fry is holding them back there for a donation of $5. Now, I'm Stephen H. Smith. I'm chairman of the Historic Preservation Committee here in Springettsbury, and I'll be presenting the program tonight. Tonight's presentation, Malin Haynes Acres, is a continuation of the History Night program that I did in April. Tonight I'll begin with a brief highlights of that April's history talk prior to presenting the new material on Malin Haynes activities in our township from about 1940 into the early 1950s. That final decade on his Haynes Acres farm was a period when his holdings throughout York County grew to surpass 1,900 acres on 12 properties, plus an acquisition of a 3,000-acre ranch in South Dakota. Hence the title, Malin Haynes Acres. Now, one of those properties, the 92-acre farm he named Haynes Plains, spanned both Springettsbury and Helen Townships. The background of the title slide in this is this 1952 aerial photo, which looks to the southeast. Malin Haynes' legacy in Springettsbury Township is most apparent in the naming of Haynes Road and the Haynes Acres housing development, which during the time of this photo was the name of his first farm. So the farm, Haynes Acres, became the development, Haynes Acres. So it's two distinctly different entities there. Acknowledging some of the sources, a lot of the photos in this presentation came from the York County History Center, where they house the Malin Haynes scrapbooks. The Springettsbury Township Historic Preservation Committee has aerial photos and some of the photos. Newspapers.com is a great resource to use when looking up information. And photos and postcards submitted to me or on my blog site, yorkspast.com, on the York Daily Record website. Now, a great resource is the Malin Haynes scrapbooks. He donated these to the Martin Memorial Library in 1960. They are now housed in the collections of the York County History Center. A book plate in the front of each volume contains Malin Haynes' own description of himself. Quote, as a churchman, Boy Scout leader for 44 years, YMCA member for 56 years, merchant, sportsman, athlete, farmer, rancher, builder, financier, world traveler. He is a man who never drank liquor or even coffee, never smoked, and has always been physically fit, end quote. So that's how he describes himself. This slide represents the start of the 40 years Mahlon Haynes lived in Springettsbury Township. In 1912, a few weeks following the birth of his second son, Mahlon Haynes II, Haynes had moved to this, or basically had this residence built in Springettsbury Township at the northwest corner of North Rockmorn Street and East Philadelphia Street in the old East York neighborhood. The family moves in during the spring of 1913, and the house still stands today. As a brief background, Haynes started in the shoe business during 1907. 6 years later, when Haynes moves his family to Springettsbury, he is already a successful shoe merchant, billing himself as Haynes the Shoe Wizard. The photo shows his first out-of-state store in Frederick, Maryland, when it opened in 1910. Now, after only 5 years of living on Rockmorn Street, Mahlon Haynes opened an additional 10 stores. So in 5 years, he opened 10 more stores. At that time, this photo of his Rockmorn Street home was taken. It appears the photo shows June Haynes, his wife, and her 3 children on the porch steps. I tried to enlarge, but the resolution was not there. The youngest is daughter June Irwin Haynes, who was born in 1916. Unfortunately, she was a victim of the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic, claiming her life in 1918 at only 2 years old. This is Haynes Shoes Company headquarters building when it opened at 1915 at 231 North George Street in York. Here's a 1916 photo of Mr. and Mrs. Mahlon Haynes. At the time, June Haynes is 31 years old and Mahlon Haynes is 41 years old. In 1916, Mahlon Haynes purchased this first farm in York County. It is a farm of 123 acres situated along the Susquehanna River, Noakabac. He names it Wizard Ranch. It is tied to his hoof venture, taking cowhide to shoes that he was going to do it all in that area. It didn't work out, so he quickly abandoned it. However, the Wizard Ranch was kept, and it became a big part of Haynes' life. In 1917, Mahlon Haynes purchases the second farm in York County. It is in Springettsbury Township, and it consists of 199 acres adjoining the east side of present-day Haynes Road. Haynes names his farm Haynes Acres. In 1954, the farm begins a transformation to Haynes Acres housing development. One of Haynes' first national exposures as far as publications goes, in 1921, the Shoe Retailer Trade Publication has a big deal about Haynes' mobile shoe store. Haynes is also a builder. He opened this building in York. It opened in 1923. It's a 4-story known as the Haynes Building, built on the northeast corner of East Market Street and North Duke Street, catty corner from the Yorktown Hotel. He actually built it 2 years before the Yorktown was built. Another building that he built, 1923, local newspapers report Mahlon Haynes moves his family and household goods on January 23, 1923, from Rockmorn Street residence to this newly built house in Haynes Acres. The pictured home, which shows the south side of the house, is presently used for offices of the Eastminster Presbyterian Church at 311 Haynes Road. In 1924, there is another major purchase of land by Malin Haynes. He makes a string of neighboring land purchases in Springettsbury Township, which quickly balloons to encompass 318 acres. The location of that acreage, south of East Market Street and west of Edgewood Road, is annotated on the right side of the shown 1938 aerial photo. Haynes names this Yorkshire ranch because the purchase was contingent upon Haynes purchasing all unsold lots which remained from a housing department that had started years earlier. Haynes continues to build in York. 1925, he has his 5-story, 47-room Haynes Hotel built at the northwest corner of North George Street and West Philadelphia Street in York. The first floor of the Haynes Hotel contains retail stores and one of his shoe stores. Again in 25, another building project of Haynes is the Yorkshire 2-room schoolhouse of the Springettsbury Independent School District. Did anybody go to that? Oh, wow, got a couple back there. The schoolhouse opened on September 8, 1925, facing Maywood Road at the southwest corner of Fifth Avenue. The schoolhouse was completely financed by Haynes and was leased at $1 per year to the Springettsbury Independent School Board. Per his scrapbooks, it appears the 50-year-old Malin Haynes made a New Year's resolution at the start of 1926 to be a cowboy. Haynes seems to immerse himself in learning about pioneer life on the Great Plains, of Indian lore, and of Western cowboys, which he could not only learn about, but he often tried to act like one. Haynes purchased the best horses money could buy and begins to race them. He purchases additional oxen and personally uses them for ranch chores, although it was likely practice for when he drove ox teams to pull wagons and carts in parades, which he often did, not only in York, but other communities that he had shoe stores, all to get his picture in the paper, which he liked to do. 1926, Malin Haynes came up with a unique way of exercising the buffaloes that he had on his Yorkshire ranch, so that they would remain healthy. Aviator Carl Ort flew over the buffaloes every Sunday at 3 o'clock, which caused them to run around and again eat properly. It always drew big crowds of spectators. News articles about that event were printed in newspapers across the United States and other countries. So Springettsbury gets national and worldly exposure with the buffaloes here. Another thing that Haynes enjoyed was hosting Indians. Now, 1926, Malin Haynes was adopted into the Hopi tribe and named Chief Yellow Ears. During that visit here, under the direction of the United States government, 5 full-blooded Hopi Indians from Arizona toured the United States as part of the Sesquicentennial. Following their appearance before President Coolidge in Washington, D.C., they were booked by Nathan Appel Enterprises to give 3 shows at the Strand Theater in York on July 5th, 6th, and 7th, prior to traveling to Philadelphia. Their ceremonies and dances were showcased at the Strand, some of which used live rattlesnakes. Now, there was a need for someone to entertain the Hopis while in York. Haynes volunteered. The Hopis enjoyed Haynes' hospitality so much that Mr. Haynes was adopted into the Hopi tribe at Haynes Ranch, or at Yorkshire Ranch, under an apple tree, the newspaper said, and made a chief. So he enjoyed that. Haynes also hosted rodeos at Haynes Park in Yorkshire. All of them were pretty much for charity. I didn't find any that weren't for a charity. So he was basically big into doing this for charity. 1927, on the streets in York, Haynes rides the ox team to drive his Conestoga wagon in a parade celebrating the sesquicentennial of the Continental Congress meeting in York. He did that not only in York, but he actually drove this on the streets in Washington, D.C. too. I saw a newspaper article. So he went all over with this. In 1927, Haynes and some of his friends wanted to stage weekly horse races. However, upon being turned down on using the half-mile track at the York Fairgrounds, Haynes began planning his own half-mile track in the corner of Yorkshire Ranch. The track replaced what was known as the Haynes Zoo. It was not attracting much attention anymore. So as soon as something wasn't attracting attention, Haynes got rid of it and got something else. He liked to be the center of attention. So that Haynes Park racetrack opened in 1928. It became the first large-scale entertainment venue in Springettsbury Township, regularly attracting crowds of 3,000 and up. From 1930 to 1937, the York Airport was located across the road from Haynes Farm. Now, during that time, the road between what is now East Market Street and Mount Rose Avenue was named Airport Road. In 1937, the York Airport property was liquidated. That property west of Haynes Acres would soon be the site of the Faithfield development. Upon the airport leaving, the road name was changed from Airport Road to Haynes Road. Haynes probably had a big say in that. The next slide, the last slide from the review, here is a 1939 view of the front of the Haynes Mansion in Haynes Acres. That is, it's the north side. Mahlon Haynes was an 1896 graduate of what became the University of Maryland. He often entertained trustees, faculty, and alumni from College Park. This finishes the brief highlights of the April talk. Now we can begin looking at Mahlon Haynes' activities in Springettsbury Township from 1940s to the early 1950s, and then look at Haynes Acres development. Now, Mahlon Haynes was extremely proud of creating the annual York Horse Show. The initial one was held June 15, 1940 at Haynes Park. The photo shows Mahlon Haynes taking his hunter, Danger Man, over the jumps in preparation for competing in the competition. He won some things, but the show was actually a bigger success than they anticipated. There were 5,000 people attending the day-long event, and most of the honors went to out-of-town and out-of-state horsemen from all over the East Coast that came to this, mainly because Haynes was putting this on. The news articles reported on the fine caliber of the competition, and again, all receipts went to charity. 1940 turned out to be the most successful year for Haynes racehorses, which ended up winning 60 races throughout the year. This photo is from the Lancaster Intelligential Journal of September 12, 1940. The caption notes Mahlon Haynes of York, PA is pictured with the trophy he received for his bay colt High Point, winning the featured event for 3-year-old pacers at the Reading Fair event on September 10th. Haynes' privately owned stable has taken a total of 48 races up to that point, which include many featured East Coast and Midwest races. It went on to say, just last week, Haynes' 2-year-old pacer Black Hawk won the featured stakes race at the Indiana State Fair in Indianapolis with a prize of nearly $15,000. His prize money that year went over $200,000. Now, he's probably paying a lot for all those horses. But he was successful in racing horses. This local scouting headquarters sent out this announcement in February of 1941 to scout troops and Cub Scout dens, not only in York and Adams County, but also scout councils in Lancaster, Dauphin, Franklin counties, plus Baltimore and Washington, D.C. Now, quoting it, it says, "A great safari of all scouts and leaders, June 19th, 20th, and 21st. The guests of our National Councilman, Colonel Malin N. Haynes, who will have, as his aides, real cowboys and Indians. This will be the biggest, best, and most stupendous camp-out experience ever attempted. Real buffaloes, oxen, covered wagons, pack mules, chuck wagons, and real, honest-to-goodness food. Our host is providing it all for free. You will get a letter from Colonel Hayes telling you all about it." So I wondered when he started becoming known as the Colonel, and actually found something in 1935. Now, Malin Haynes started to be known as the Colonel in 1935 after a local American Legion post put on a circus using local performers. They hired George Myers, who had previous circus experience and had produced circuses using non-professional local talent. Malin Haynes offered a cowboy act utilizing his ranch hands. He proposed calling the act Malin Haynes and his Wizard Ranch Riders. Instead, George Myers coined the act Colonel Haynes' Wild West Show. For weeks after the show, everybody was calling him the Colonel. So Haynes took that title and said, "I like it so much, they keep telling me that, so I'm going to use that." So he first used it for Boy Scouts, but then he used it for everything. So 1931 was when the Colonel term was coined. Now, the total Boy Scouts, Sea Scouts, and Cub Scouts attending the 1941 Haynes Safari numbered 1,525. The National Boy Scout authorities called it the largest single encampment of Boy Scouts ever known in the United States up to that point. The rodeo Friday evening was the only event that was open to the public. It was reported over 8,000 attended that rodeo. They basically have, there's an area in Haynes Wizard Ranch that is kind of like an amphitheater. You can get on the ground above it and look down on it. So that must have been such a sight. I was looking for a picture of it, but I didn't find one. The photo shows Haynes teaching his leathercraft skills. However, he was upstaged by the demonstrations given by 12 Indians from the Iroquois tribe, who attracted bigger crowds than him. Now, I guess Haynes didn't like that, but Haynes brought these Indians to the safari from there was actually an Iroquois reservation in Lawton, New York at the time. In recognition of the hospitality they received from Haynes, he was dropped into the Iroquois tribe as chief corn planter. So he's now 2 Indian chiefs. One more to be had. Now, during World War II, Malin Haynes combined his wealth and his advertising and selling tablets in promoting and purchasing of war savings bonds, which were basically a loan from the United States Treasury to half finance World War II. Even though the bonds offered a rate below the market value, they became a morale booster, allowing citizens to have a financial stake in the war effort. Haynes attended many regional bond rallies in communities, not only in York County, but anywhere that he had a shoe store. Usually saying nothing until he was usually prearranged with a speaker that they would bring up something like, that a rich man like Haynes ought to buy a bond. Then Malin would leap up to the platform, calls for the music saying, When I see a crowd like this, when I hear a music band play, he announces, I go crazy. I won't buy a $50 bond. I positively refuse to buy a $100 bond. But I'll tell you what I'll do. I'm Haynes the Shoe Wizard. If this wonderful audience will subscribe to $45,000 worth, I'll buy a $5,000 bond to contribute to your rally total. So this is reported in quite a few newspapers where and he's always doing the same routine, but he gets the newsprint every time. That was just one of the schemes used to promote war bond sales, while also gaining the publicity Haynes desired. When Hollywood celebrities held war bond rallies in the region, Haynes managed to find a way to be involved. On September 3rd, 1942, actress Hedy Lamarr was in York for several war bond rally events. As pictured at the right side, the day started with a 12:30 p.m. rally for the workers at the York Safe and Lock Company plant in Springettsbury Township. Then Miss Lamarr was guest of honor at a dinner party held at the Country Club of York for those who had purchased within the past 2 weeks at least $1,000 of war bonds. Now, Haynes was part of that, but he was kind of in the crowd. After dinner, Miss Lamarr appeared for a show at the Valencia Ballroom on North George Street in York, where admission was the purchase of a $1 savings stamp. When Haynes visited Valencia that evening, he noticed a big crowd had showed up just to see Lamarr enter, and then they appeared to be walking away. After seeing half the ballroom was empty, and seeing a photographer nearby, Haynes seized the opportunity by offering to buy a $1,000 war bond on the spot if those outside would be admitted for free. This offer was accepted, and the photo and story of him buying that war bond appeared in the paper the next day, just like he wanted it. On October 29, 1942, actor Gloria Stewart was in Hanover for several war rally events, which continued a week-long war bond and stamp selling campaign dubbed Hanover's Victory Week. The day started for Miss Stewart with an afternoon war bond rally for workers of the Cannon Shoe Company in McSherrystown, one of Haynes' adversaries. A victory dinner followed at the Haynes YWCA prior to Miss Stewart leading the Hanover Halloween parade, which stepped off at 8 o'clock. Now, Haynes managed to get in the works that he volunteered to utilize one of his antique horse-drawn coaches and personally ride the horses to carry Miss Stewart down the parade. So he actually got to lead the parade. And so after which, Miss Stewart's final appearance of the day was a dance at the Hanover Country Club, which included an auction. Now, they auctioned off Gloria Stewart's corsage. It turned out to be a big ticket item that got newspaper coverage because after spirited bidding with a pledge to purchase $10,000 of war bonds, Malin Haynes was a winning bidder, and with it won a kiss from Miss Stewart. So I wonder when he took that massage or corsage home and said, I paid $10,000 of this for you. I guess she was used to it. Malin Haynes' war bond activities caught the attention of the National Weekly Saturday Evening Post, resulting in a 5-page article in the April 3rd, 1943 issue. The shown lead photograph basically captured Haynes in his car that he usually was riding around in New York. His car is fire engine red and letters gold. The nationally known writer Dave Soules wrote the article, which started off with war bond activities, however quickly evolved in the story how Haynes does business and his knack for self-promotion. Quoting the first paragraph, quote, Malin H. Haynes is a cherubical little man with an impish grin and a vast ego who keeps citizens of York, Pennsylvania and its environs alternating between chuckles, aspiration, and gratitude. Totally without inhibition, he greets strangers with, "Hello, I'm Haynes the Shoe Wizard. Who are you?" He loves to lead parades in fancy costumes, make speeches, get his picture in the paper, and comport himself in a fashion which his wife resigningly calls making a spectacle of himself. So Haynes would go on to get national exposure in magazines such as Life, Look, and Time. This photo of Mahlon Haynes' family in their living room appears in the Saturday Evening Post article. On June 8, 1939, Sarah Mercer Stahl married Mahlon Haynes II. He served as sales executive for the Haynes Shoe Company. During World War II, Corporal Haynes served in Company B, the 161st Airborne Engineer Battalion. Mahlon II and Sarah had 3 children, Mahlon III, Susan, and Annie. In the photo are June and Mahlon Haynes seated. Mahlon Haynes II and Sarah are sitting higher on the chair armrest, and grandson, Mahlon Haynes III, is in Mahlon's lap. The caption of this photo in the Saturday Evening Post is, "The hearth and family of a completely happy man who has everything he dreamed of as a boy. A big estate, farms, fine horses, cattle, and a boat." The York Horse Show continued to be an annual event at Haynes Park in Yorkshire. During World War II, all proceeds went to the York USO. So every year they had it, the proceeds went to the USO. With the war in Europe over on May 7th, 1945, Haynes decides to hold another big scouting event at Wizard Ranch. The genuine Indians were such a hint at the 1941 safari, Haynes wanted to add to the experience for the 1945 encampment. He still wanted Indians that could give demonstrations. However, he also wanted an Indian chief that spoke good English so that he could directly teach their spoken language. Haynes wrote to the Department of the Interior. The government knew just the chief that fits Haynes' requirements, Chief Henry Standing Bear of the Pine Ridge Sioux Reservation. Haynes sent for Chief Standing Bear. He turned out to be a stately and brilliant Sioux, eloquent in both English and his native language. Haynes was taken with Chief Standing Bear, as were with most wide-eyed Boy Scouts at the safari, as they learned phrases in the Sioux language. The June 20th through June 23rd encampment during 1945 was well attended by 1,900 scouts. With the surrender of Japan later that summer on August 14th, 1945, Mahlon Haynes was contacted by Chief Standing Bear, who inquired if Haynes wanted to be included in a traditional Sioux victory celebration celebrating the defeat of Japan at the end of World War II. Chief Standing Bear also asked if he'd like to become a Sioux chief. That was a stupid question. So he said, all you have to do is be in Pine Ridge, South Dakota on September 13th for this 2-day ceremony. So, of course, Haynes was there. So besides virtually continuous victory dances, there were also ceremonies honoring the 1,100 Sioux which served in the military, special recognition for those that gave their lives, while honoring the Gold Star mothers on the reservation. On the second day, 2 individuals became the first white Sioux chiefs in the nation. Chief feathers were presented by Chief Henry Standing Bear before the assemblage to Colonel William C. Lewis and Colonel Malin N. Haynes. Colonel Lewis was christened Chief Brave Eagle for his support in improving life on the reservation while commanding the Rapid City Army Air Base. Colonel Haynes was christened Chief Flying Eagle for his advocacy in striving to keep the Sioux language and traditions alive. Now, before returning home, Haynes hired a taxi and toured the Blacklands and the Badlands and the Black Hills of South Dakota. He was waiting in Rapid City to return home in an airplane that he had chartered that didn't arrive in time. So he was walking around town, and he was attracted in a window in a realtor's office. It said, "Ranch for Sale." Realtor Charles Donnelly explained the ranch as one of the most famous ranches in western South Dakota. It is known as the Old Quab Moore Place. So Haynes and Donnelly drove out and looked the place over. It contained an impressive main house and over 3,000 acres. Haynes wrote a check out at the time, so the realtor was like kind of flabbergasted. It's like, yeah, I have to clear that this is, the money's in the bank, don't worry. It's like, so he had a ranch. The same day, he hired a former foreman, Howard Pierce, to run it. So he had like 3,000 acres in South Dakota. What about the land here in York County? Now, 1946, Haynes had a significant amount of property in York County. The table shows the names Malin Haynes gave to his 9 farms at that time. He would add 3 more farms that amounted to an additional 100 acres. After a brief look at the Haynes land purchased in, I'll look at briefly at land purchased in Helen Township, then I'll come back to the Haynes Plains farm, which spans Springettsbury and Helen Townships. Now, Wizard Ranch in Helen Township, near Accomack, that was the first land he purchased in York County. It began with a 123-acre farm purchased in 1916. However, it was continually added to buy neighboring properties until it encompassed 320 acres by 1946. Now, observe the last 4 lines of the table. Malin Haynes' acreage total in York County was having a big growth spurt during the 1940s, primarily by acquisitions of large farms in Helen Township. These last 4 farms were located south of the Lincoln Highway, today's Route 462, about halfway between Helen and Wrightsville. The farms generally bordered the west side of Strickler School Road. The 429-acre, relatively flat Haynes Plantation was located a short distance south of the Lincoln Highway, and from there the Haynes High-Low Lands, South Hill Farms, and Haynes Hilltop Farm stretched from the plantation further and further up the forested hillside to the lower side of Mount Pisgah Road. This group of 4 farms totaled 733 acres. The plantation land contained corn and wheat fields plus pastures for a large herd of cattle. After Haynes purchased the ranch out in South Dakota, they had a lot of excess cattle, and he shipped them by the carloads here to put on his ranch, primarily that plantation ranch, and also Wizard Ranch. Now, the plantation land, like I said, contained corn and wheat fields. Haynes, on the forested hillside, Haynes, his friends, and scouts made use of hiking and hunting paths between the York Valley and Mount Pisgah, which Haynes claimed went back to the trails used by the Indians. And on that note, after the Sam Lewis State Park was established on the upper side of Mount Pisgah Road in the 1950s, Malin Haynes offered 250 acres free of the neighboring forested land as an addition to the state park, along with $10,000 to help development for recreational use. His condition, the addition had to be named Colonel Malin Haynes Mount Pisgah Forest. Quoting the small lettering on the sign, quote, "We Americans need to learn to walk again if we are to be strong and healthy. This is Haynes' gift to you. Use it," end quote. The gift was never accepted by the state. They don't like to be told how to name things. Today, Laurel Estates, an upscale housing development along Laurel Drive and Dogwood Drive, now occupies part of where Malin Haynes Farms on that hillside existed. This present aerial photo of Haynesboro area of Pelham Township is used as the background to point out the location of Haynes' 175-acre Buttonwood Farm. You see Buttonwood on the right lane, that gives you a clue where his farm was. So in 1947, see the difference. You see where the farm is. It's like almost the whole east side of where Hellenboro is now. Now Haynes owned that farm, shown in this photo. That's Haynes' Buttonwood Farm. And between 1933 and 1935, Haynes made purchases to create that 175-acre property. During the latter part of Haynes' life, he sold off various sections totaling 47 acres. However, the remaining 120-acre farm was sold to settle his estate. In 1987, the group of owners of the remaining Buttonwood Farm, calling themselves Haynes Farm Joint Venture, developed the site with 418 apartments known as Buttonwood Gardens, 145 townhouses known as Buttonwood Crossing, and the 22-acre Haynes Historic Pelham Preserve was part of a sale in 1978. That Pelham Preserve, Historic Pelham Preserve, it contains a historic dramatic log house which has been tree ring dated as being built in the winter of 1758 and 59, or shortly thereafter. Now, as April History Night's presentation, I discussed Haynes' major properties in Springettsbury, the Haynes Acres Farm and the Yorkshire Ranch in detail. The third farm, a 92-acre property purchased in 1944, was only partly in Springettsbury Township. Malin Haynes named that property Haynes Plains, and a structure placed on it remains a significant part of his legacy. So this present northwesterly view over the Haynes Shoe House, everything shown below the yellow property line is part of Haynes Plains Farm, which was purchased in 1944. The southwesterly section of that farm is in Springettsbury Township. On Haynes Plains Farm, the Haynes Shoe House opens in 1949, and the Hermitage, Haynes Retirement House, opens in 1952. This present straight down aerial is used to show all of the yellow property within the 92-acre Haynes Plains Farm. This 1947 aerial photo shows Haynes Plains Farm 3 years after Malin Haynes purchased it from the descendants of Albert and Amelia Smizer. Their Smizer farm at this site goes back to 1892. The road marking the northern property boundary was just starting to be called Pleasant Valley Road in the 1940s. Prior to that, it was simply known as the Public Road, or the Road to Christ Creek, or the Road to Christ Creek Church. So Pleasant Acres, and this is actually before the Pleasant Acres property opened in Springettsbury in 1952. So they were calling, at first I thought Pleasant Valley Road was named after Pleasant Acres Road, but it wasn't. Pleasant Valley Road came first. The light and dark stripe patterns in the fields are due to Malin Haynes' direction to his farm managers to use contour farming and crop rotation practices. In his scrapbooks, he has a lot of information on the proper way to farm, so he basically was studying up on it. In the 1930s, the road from the Lincoln Highway back to the farm was commonly known as Spicer Farm Road. That road was officially named Shoehouse Road after the shoe house was built. It was years earlier that Haynes had thought about a house shaped like a shoe. On the Haynes Plains farm, he had a mound 85 feet higher and clearly visible than the Lincoln Highway. That would be the ideal spot to put such a shoe house. Haynes took one of his best-selling high-top shoes to a horseman friend who was actually a rider in the York Horse Show that he produced. He happened to be an architect. Haynes asked him, "Can you design a house like this?" So evidently he didn't go to Dentwolf again. I guess he would feel embarrassed to do that. So he went to his horseman friend, and turns out this is the earliest concept elevation of a proposed shoe house for Malin Haynes. It is from architect Frederick J. Remp's drawing dated June 28, 1948. This is the south-facing side of the shoe house. That is the side facing present Route 4062. The design was refined through several variations until a layout was to Malin Haynes' liking in September of 1948. With the foundation drawings complete October 7th, a groundbreaking took place the following week and the foundation work started. The last of the detailed interior drawings were completed January 25th, 1949. And the York County History Center has all these drawings. Here is the corresponding plan view of the initial concept drawing of June 28, 1948. Through all these variations, at one time there was this is a right shoe. There was a left shoe planned at one point in the variations. However, shown here, the shoe house started as a right shoe and was built as a right shoe. The aerial photograph on this Haynes shoe house postcard was taken during the final week of work on the shoe house in preparation for the May 1949 opening. The neighboring light and dark stripe patterns are, again, they're due to the contour farming and crop rotation practices on the surrounding fields. Malin Haynes prepares to drive the initial guests to the shoe house during the first week of May 1949. The photo is from an article in Life magazine of June 6th of 1949 that reported on their coverage of the event. During the remainder of 1949, Haynes turned the shoe house over to various elderly couples for a week at a time. Officials in York County towns and communities selected the deserving couples. Haynes paid for their meals, provided a cook and a chauffeur-driven car for their use. One day a week, their family and friends were treated to a party at the shoe house, with Haynes, again, picking up all expenses. The first guests were Mr. and Mrs. John F. Bond of Loganville. They had 12 children, and they brought their large families to this party. It was a huge gathering. Haynes lost a lot of money that day. Now, beginning in 1950, Haynes offered free use of the shoe house to honeymooners, and later it was rented out. Malin Haynes also had other plans for the Haynes Plains farm. Shoe House Acres housing development was proposed per a tentative layout of October 19, 1948. This is a close-up of the title block of those plans drawn up by C.S. Davidson. This is the whole tentative layout of the first phase of Shoe House Acres. containing 108 lots, 29 lots in Section A, 63 lots in Section B, and 16 lots in Section C. It was meant to be expanded further north. And what I've done is I pointed out the location of where the shoe house is, Shoe House Road, and what I've done is superimposed it here over a present aerial photo. So it basically shows where that is with respect to other features on current aerial photos. Now, in Springettsbury Township, where you see Sandra Drive, that is the northern part of the Yorkland housing development in Springettsbury. That goes right up to the shoe house property. Now, Haynes decided not to develop Shoe House Acres. It never went beyond the planning stage. Maybe it's best that it did not, since a little over 20 years later, that's when Route 30 went through that area, although they might have shifted it further north if the development had gone through. Another possibility is the shoe house turned out to be such a big promotional item, Haynes didn't want anything around it to take away from it. That's probably the reason he decided not to go ahead with the development. Now, in all of Haynes' 50 shoe stores at that time, opening day of 1950 saw this notice posted in showroom windows. Quote, "Are you thinking of being married in 1950? Then follows a suggestion that if so, young couples might see the manager inside the store about spending a honeymoon at no cost. It is the owner, Malin Haynes' way of attracting attention to the shoe house near York, which he erected for the express purpose of entertaining couples. Last year, oldest couples in York County, this year, newly married couples." So the manager of the shoe store in Sunbury, Northumberland County, phoned in a request the first day. So Mr. and Mrs. Lamar Runkle of Mifflinburg were the initial honeymoon guests of Malin Haynes during the first week of January. The request came in from all locales where Haynes had shoe stores, which resulted in a wider range of free advertising, which actually worked out better than just the elderly couples from York County. You only got York County publicity. He wanted wider publicity. He also had guests coming in from Rapid City, South Dakota, where he had his Flying Eagle Ranch. The first Rapid City honeymooner guests at the shoe house were Mr. and Mrs. Lewis Kleebler during April of 1950. In 1951, Malin Haynes was starting work on a cowboy boot house at his Flying Eagle Ranch to more directly offer free, unique place for honeymooners at that location. Now, the pictured cowboy boot house here was one built recently in Texas. It seemed to be a direct description of one I found in the newspapers. So maybe they found that and said, we're going to do that. Haynes would have liked that. Now, unfortunately, when Haynes was out there, his wife, June, died of a sudden heart attack at Haynes Acres on September 24th, 1951. Haynes' interest in almost everything died that day. All work on the cowboy boot house ended, and after his wife died, Haynes tended to keep to himself. He spent a lot of time at Wizard Ranch, often seen clearing brush or collecting rocks, which were used in building of his downsized retirement house. A year after June's death, actually on the first anniversary of her death, Malin Haynes decided to give his business away. His employees were given their respective shoe stores, and jointly they were given control of the shoe house. In 1952, Haynes downsizes. He sells the Haynes Acres mansion along with 8 acres of surrounding property, first to a surgeon, and then it becomes the property of the Eastminster Presbyterian Church. And he moves to this place, which he terms the Hermitage, which he had built across the road from the shoe house. Now, on the outside walls and throughout the Hermitage are rocks Haynes harvested from Wizard Ranch. In November of 1953, Abe Epstein purchases 55 acres of Haynes Acres Farm from Malin Haynes for a housing development. Epstein was exercised an option to purchase the remaining 212 acres of the farm in January of 1955. In order for Epstein to name the development Haynes Acres, Malin Haynes agreed to make a donation to the Girl Scouts. In the photo, Malin Haynes hands his donation to Girl Scout leaders as Abe Epstein looks on. Epstein Building Company gets approval to start developing Haynes Acres early in 1954. Epstein and Sons are the builders and sellers of the homes in Haynes Acres. The sons are Irwin, Bernard, Harold, and Donald. I've annotated this 1957 topographic map, which is based upon a mid-1955 data. It shows the initial 11 Haynes Acres houses at the left side. So in that little blue bubble I put around the area, those are the first 11 houses. And per property deed records, on September 20th, 1954, the house at 2425 Cambridge Road is the first Haynes Acres house sold by Epstein. At the bottom, I pointed out the Haynes Farm Barn, which was used to store construction materials as Haynes Acres houses were being built. The farm manager's house was repurposed and still stands as a house at 541 Sundale Drive. The large pond just south of the barn was fed by a small creek that came down through the hills to the right. The former creek bed in the hills is now a landscape drainage ditch that also serves as a property line between the neighboring backyards of Haynes Acres homes. To show how Haynes Acres development progressed, I've decided to flip through the years when the initial roads began to put in various sections. I've listed all the roads in that section and pointed to the roads that served as border roads with future sections. Now, to the north of the 1954 initial section, it borders the 8-acre mansion property and the Haynes Farm property line. Besides Haynes Road, the other bordered roads are Sundale Drive, Brookside Lane, Earlene Drive, and 7th Avenue. Brookside Lane is one of the roads that that creek flows along today. Continuing south, this 1955 section has the land set aside for East York Elementary School, which was built, I think, a year or two later. I didn't quite look up when that date was. But besides Haynes Road, the other border roads are Sundale Drive and Raleigh Drive in that section. Does anybody live in that section? Oh, probably about 7. Wow. I should have asked about the previous one. Anybody live in the first section? Nope. Okay, in 1955, progressing south along Haynes Road, the 1955 section had land set aside for, continuing south to Mountain Rose Avenue. The 1956 section has Earlene Drive and the curve of Eastwood Drive bordering the future commercial space at the corner of Haynes Road and Mountain Rose Avenue. there were no access roads directly to Mount Rose Avenue from the 1956 section. They weren't allowed. Continuing east along Mount Rose Avenue, the 1957 section is bounded by Mount Rose Avenue and the Haynes Farm property line to the south, and to the north is that former creek bed which once filled the large pond on the Haynes Farm. A number of people have asked me, is that creek named? And they're all residents of properties that their backyard, this creek flows through. When it rains, it's big. When it's not raining, it's just a little gully there. Anybody live along one of those areas? No. But I've never heard the name of that creek. And next is the 1960 section, which is the final part of the Haynes Acres Farm to be developed for residential use. The bounds are the Haynes Farm property line to the north and east, and to the south, the former creek bed, which once filled the large pond on Haynes Farm. So that concludes the development, the residential development of the former Haynes Farm. Now, within the 1960 section is where the Haynes Farm barn stood that was used to store construction materials as Haynes Acres Farm was being built. In this 1971 aerial photo, I pointed out the barn's location with respect to surrounding roads in the development. The barn was torn down in the early 1990s to build several additional houses in that area. However, the farm manager's house was repurposed and still stands as a house at 541 Sundale Drive. Anybody live in that area? Oh, yeah. Do you know when the barn was torn down exactly? All I heard was like early 90s. Do you have any of the houses that were built where the barn was torn down? No? Okay. Continuing on, Epstein made a property purchase to add the 1962 section which bridged the gap between Haynes Acres Farm property and a location on Mount Rose Avenue where he was allowed access. Cambridge Road is the connecting road between the 1960 and 1962 sections, and is also one of the two connections to Mount Rose Avenue. The other Haynes Acre access to Mount Rose Avenue is via Hartford Road. Why did Haynes expand in that direction? It was because in 1961, York Suburban School District acquired a 24-acre property in the indicated neighboring area to the north. They acquired it from Charlotte Kesey Walker, and that effectively blocked the early Haynes Acres access to that area. The school district used some of the land to build the junior high school, but they had more land than they needed. So they slowly sold off the rest, such as the site that was used with the first Church of the Brethren site. Also, eventually, some of that property ended up purchased by the developer to build other sections of Haynes Acres. Now, the 24-acre property was known as the Kesey Farm. And the Kesey Farm was a pain in Malin Haynes' side because he wanted to buy it because it would have allowed him connecting his Haynes Acres Farm and his Yorkshire Ranch. That was the property between them. He was never able to purchase it. So lo and behold, he lets Epstein develop his property, and suddenly someone or one of the Kesey people sell it. But it doesn't go directly to Epstein. It goes through the school district. Now, the Haynes Acres signage at Hartford Road in the 1962 section is the only entrance to the Haynes Acres development that had any signage. When the road was widened, Mount Rose Avenue was widened during 1912, 1913, or 2012, 2013, that was torn down. So you don't have any signage now going into Haynes Acres. Haynes wouldn't have liked that. This commercial 1964 section in the corner of Haynes Road and Mount Rose Avenue is the last part of the Haynes farm property to be developed. In the late 1964, the Sun Oil Company started the process of placing a service station at that corner. The initial section of the Haynes Acres Shopping Center followed in 1965. So here's a present northeastward aerial view of the corner of Haynes Road and Mount Rose Avenue, where Jones Sunoco opened in the spring of 1965, and Jay's Food Market opened October 12, 1965. In the coming years, the Haynes Acres Shopping Center expanded to the size shown. Epstein made property purchases to add the 1966 section, bridging the gap between Haynes farm property and Kingston Road. Durham Road is the connecting road between 1960 and the 1966 sections. There are 3 Haynes Acres connections to Kingston Road via the 1966 section: Courtly Drive, Ivory Road, and Quaker Drive. The 1967 section resulted from additional Epstein property purchases, which filled a few gaps between the 1966 section and existing housing developments, the Hill and the southernmost houses of Yorkshire. Also, as indicated in orange at the top of the slide, 1967 saw the completion of 4 model homes along Kingston Road, which were utilized for sales purposes until 1974. Anybody visit those and then buy a house in the township, in Haynes Acres? Oh, yeah, a couple people. Okay, good. But basically, they had a lot of model houses in various sections of Haynes Acres, and usually didn't last more than a half a year or a year before they were sold. So they decided to put 4 houses together, and they decided they'd keep them as show houses. So those 4 houses shown here, these are present views of those 4 model houses with prices from 1967. So you have the 2-story colonial, you have the split level, traditional rancher, and the high ranch. I looked up current prices, pretty much all of them are 10 times the value now. So simply add a 0 to all those for current prices. The 1968 section largely resulted from Epstein acquiring and developing parts of the former Kesey farm, which had become available. In the late 1960s, Springettsbury Township started requiring housing developments to have a recreation area set aside as a township park. Kingston Park was thus established at the corner of Kingston Road and Sundale Drive. Through a patchwork of acquisitions, Epstein acquired the land to develop the 1973 section. A wanted access to Edgewood Road was denied. Instead, the connection to Pinehurst Road in the Hill development, allowed Haynes Acres residents access to Edgewood Road via Linwood Lane in the Hill development. So they had to go through another development to get in from Edgewood Road. So there's the complete Haynes Acres property. Now, a couple of people asked about in the newsletter. I said an 800 acre at Haynes Acres. I said where I got it. It's like there's a couple of publications. It's like the Springettsbury 100th anniversary book says Haynes Acres is 800 acres. There's the Pennsylvania Historic Museum Commission report that came out when they widened Haynes Road, and that said it's 800 acres. I found two other publications that said they're 800 acres. It's not 800 acres. If you measure that, it's more like 400 acres. So I don't know where they got the 800 acres. Somebody like exaggerating. Maybe Haynes had an influence on them. Another question that often came up is concerning the various properties that Haynes had. This particular property on here, okay. The Haynes Acres Farm is basically this property here. Haynes Yorkshire Ranch came down through here. This is the Kesey property that he wanted to buy, was basically this area here. So the Kesey farm, they would not sell to Haynes, but they sold it to the school district, and then the school district used part of it for the junior high school, and the rest they sold off. So essentially, like I said, the 1968 section there was mainly from the Kesey farm that went through the school district first. But the thing that people will ask me, people that live here on Courtly Drive in this area, I said it started off as part of the Yorkshire Ranch. They said, no, we were always in Helen. It's like, we were always in Haynes Acres. Yeah, I agree you're in Haynes Acres. But before Haynes Acres, it was part of Yorkshire Ranch. So you can see certain areas there where the Yorkshire Ranch was actually preceded Haynes Acres. So I hope you enjoyed the talk. Thanks for your attention. Just on time for 8:15. Thank you. If you have any questions, I'll entertain them.